So what year did you actually graduate then? Just while we wait for a few people to join.
2012, which is nearly 10 years ago now. Can't believe
that's crazy.
Yeah.
And you worked on what were the grad films that year, and what did you work on?
The one they show around is Dancing in the Ashes, which is
yeah.
And because I did location sound, I ended up doing quite a few of them.
Sound are always in need on grads.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, in second year I did some, and then I don't think I did post on a grad in second year called French Exchange, but I didn't do any post in my third year.
Yeah.
It's kind of.
Did you kind of know by that point that you wanted to, obviously since then you specialised in production location?
Into this, but I got lucky and done a little bits and pieces by then, so I sort of knew my path coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we can get into that now then. We've had a few people join. Welcome everyone. We're here today with one of our alumni and production sound mixer, David Giles. Thank you very much for joining us. Again, second time after being at the BFI last year, actually, as well, weren't you?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you. If for anyone watching, if you've got any questions, as normal, in the Q&A tab below, just put in all your questions there, and we'll get round to those whenever we can. So yeah, David, we were just saying about.
Really like to.
Oh, go for it.
I'd just really like to sort of answer as many of your questions as possible and try and make it as relevant to you as I can. So yeah, please do stick anything in there. Thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, we were just saying that kind of by your third year, you knew that you wanted to stop doing post sound and just focus on location sound, which is what you've done since. And you mentioned you worked on a project that kind of solidified that for you.
So I got really lucky, and there's a chap in Southampton who we might talk about later, who basically did a bit of outside broadcast work between my second and third year, and then another alumni, I think, of the course called Simon Bish was looking for a trainee when I was in my third year. So one of my modules, I asked the university if I could go and trainee for him rather than do the set module, and they let me, which was lovely. So I went away and worked for 5.5 weeks with him, learning very, very fast. And yeah, so I came then to do the grads after that. So I'd done a little bit of very green trainee work before then. So I sort of knew, and I enjoyed it. So that's where I wanted to go.
Oh, great. And you said there as well for your grad film as well, you worked on quite a few, because obviously sounds quite in demand. Did you find that going into industry as well, that there was a lot more sound work than, I guess, work for your other fellow graduates in their specialisms?
I think I would sort of put the divide between kind of creative and crew, where I think those who had taken the path of learning a technical trade at university came out with a bit of something to hang their hat on and a direction. And if you've learned a sort of technical craft, it's a bit easier to force your way in, I think, than if you're going as a director or producer or writer, where the route is potentially harder and the amount of people wanting to do it is more, because it's the exciting, up the front, creative thing of doing. So yes, but I wouldn't make any difference between like camera and sound or lighting and sound. And it's all of those I would put in one thing where you have a really good opportunity.
Yeah. So what were your first steps after graduating? Or as you said, you already had some experience under your belt as well. So you kind of, did you work through that your last year essentially as well before you
Well, yeah,
graduated?
just that one job really, and also trying to, I used my position slightly different obviously now because, you know, or I'll say it sort of now is that obviously things are different right at this minute, and the kind of call someone up and try and get out on a day of work experience for the next 6 months is not going to work. So you know, that's what I did. I called around and tried to get out on sets, and kind of I did a day on Midsummer Murders as just a free work experience, getting teas and coffees, and that very like classic thing of just do what you can to get yourself out there. Obviously, right now, like when we're having to be tested 3 days a week and masks and it's a very different, it's a very regimented industry. But what I wanted to say like straight up is that like I wanted to give a real note of hope for anyone coming out who might be feeling frustrated with how things are now, in that the film industry is working like it's never worked before, and the demand for crew is higher than it's ever been. And you know, with the tax, so there's lots of Americans productions here because of the tax credit. The streaming has increased demand for productions, which has helped me personally. And you know, it isn't going to be forever. And I think, you know, come the summer, if you're sort of polite and you're personable and try and be professional, I definitely think this is the best possible time. Although it may not feel like it, it's currently the best possible time you could ever have for entering a technical craft in the film industry and television industries.
No, great. Yeah, it's good to hear. So how did you, comparing that with how when you first started in getting your first jobs, you said obviously you've worked on like Midsummer Murders. How's your career progression been since then? Obviously, was it gradually, I guess, working up similarly to budgets increasing on productions as the kind of scale of the work you're working on, or did it chop and change of what was available?
So yeah, definitely. It still chops and changes now. I mean, I literally, you know, just before this was emailing about doing a friend short from university because I want to help him out and I like sound. So, you know, it definitely, like, I don't think it goes up and then stays up. It's definitely like, there's definitely a roller coaster in everything. And also my first break really was with a chap called Barry Smith, who worked at Southern Soundkit in Southampton, which is obviously close to Bournemouth. And he was looking for a pair of helping hands and went to the university, and I sort of was lucky to get put forward. But that was doing kind of outside broadcasts. So we did a series of The Bachelor, which actually was fantastic in south of France as my first job. But then we went and did kind of other OBs where we would build a kind of the rig in a day, and I would be assisting on the camera, assisting on the sound, you know, and a real technical education in nothing to do with kind of film work, but still gaining all the skills that you need to do production sound. So I personally, I recommend actually trying to find lots of different ways of getting in. Yeah, so there's a whole gamut of things you can do within location sound, not just film work. And so I started doing OBs and then got this trainee job, which I thought, oh, this is me, I've broken into movies now, but wasn't the case, and went and did BBC comedies for a bit, which I loved and still love and would like to do again, but they are they're very rare jobs, and the people that do them cling on to them tightly, as they should, because they're so pleasant. And my big sort of break into film was on the skill set trainee scheme, which is still running. And without that, I wouldn't have met the people I met to kind of, you sort of, once you hit a point, you find, it tends to be in production sound, you find a crew, and then you stick with that crew for a few years. And it took me maybe 2 or 3 years to find my people and the people that would take me on and train me and get on with in a personal way, because it's not just about the skill and the knowledge of the craft. Like, it's just as important kind of how you get on with people and how personable you are and pleasant and excited and interested to learn without being too over keen. So yes, I definitely had some experiences before then in the film world where I didn't gel as well as I gelled with the team I ultimately ended up doing 10 movies with as an assistant. Wow. And then from then stepped out to then go and mix, which is the sort of head of department role, which I've been doing for a year or two. That answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you make that jump from there? Do you kind of mention to people when you're on certain projects, people that are higher up that would be doing that recruiting of saying, I've been doing this for so long, I want to head the department, I want to do mix now. How do you have the conversation to jump up that barrier?
From assisting to mixing, or?
Yeah.
Well, that one was an interesting one in that it's actually genuinely, it sounds corny, but it's genuinely the contacts that are made at Bournemouth that helped me do that. Because I never stopped mixing. So I mixed the grad films, and I never really stopped mixing alongside my assisting and traineeing work. The budgets were tiny, and I went and did a tiny 2-week feature called Weaverfish in Southampton, which was lovely. We all stayed away, but I wasn't a professional. I was just learning, doing it to learn. And then, doing short films with university people. And then my sort of break into mixing came when a guy called Nick Rowland, who went to the course on my year, we kept in touch, asked me to do his first film. And then I had a couple of years where I was sort of doing proper films off the back of that and assisting on kind of big movies. And then I did a scene in a film where I sort of had 113 channels of comms going on and various different things. And I sort of thought, I should probably do my own thing now. And that was a kind of, it was really, we had a tough week in the desert. Yeah, it was really good. But there came a point where I thought, I'm ready to step out on my own now. And then, and then I didn't, actually after that point, I didn't even step out immediately. It was a kind of slow transition. I then went and did a film called my last assisting film was 1917, which was really technical in the sound department because it's all one shot. And so it was a big technical challenge. And that felt a really good stepping stone to be kind of doing some very technical work on that. Felt a good stepping stone, and to sort of put my hand up and saying, right, I'm striking out on my own now.
Yeah. And what was the process? Obviously, working on 1917, there's been so many, behind the scenes featurettes about how they essentially had to create new ways of doing everything to make the film possible. What were the learning curves for you, and how did you approach that when it's all so new?
I mean, I may never do anything like it again, and certainly the mixer, who's a chap called Stuart Wilson, who I've worked for a number of years, and his second unit mixer, who's Tim White, they kind of spec'd the tech, and we had a large resource of available to us. And then it was just working from that. You basically would be presented with the particular thing you were doing in the morning, and you'd have 2 hours where you were setting up, desperately trying to make it work. You'd make it work, and then the rest of the day you'd be shooting that thing. So it was kind of a day-by-day problem-solving thing. We'd obviously be working ahead and thinking about the next day, and Stuart and Tim they were working weeks and months ahead. And it was about getting sort of into the tech of it. It was the range, getting the range, because one shot was 1 kilometer, and then we had another shot which was down in the trenches for 0.5 kilometer, and the trenches really soak up the radio mic. So we sort of had about 1.5 kilometers of RF antenna to run out, and a 10-person crew, and just coordinating all that. And sort of by that point, we've jumped ahead a little bit in this, but sort of by that point, I'd done enough years where I sort of had a handle on the tech, and I basically, my role with that team was to allow the mixer to mix as much as possible. And there were obviously decisions he had to make and things he had to do, but I did everything I could to take as much off his plate as I possibly could, to allow him to just, as much as possible, focus on the creative elements of it, which didn't always work, and he definitely was deeply involved in the tech. But my mindset was that I wanted him to not worry as much as possible, although obviously he'd be worrying all the time because it's a huge job, and we didn't know it, Yeah, but it was one thing that was lovely about it was after we'd got through the trenches, we sort of realised we could do it, and we knew it worked, and we knew we had our methods, and so the rest of it was kind of just really interesting problem solving.
And how much coordination as well with camera is there on a shoot like that, where they're also, testing the limits of what they can do under someone as, I guess, like iconic as a cinematographer as Roger is.
Yeah, he's quite a pleasant man. You would keep, certainly as kind of sound assistants on that job, you as much as possible allow the main creative team to do their thing without getting in the way. And the whole point of it is to facilitate it in such a way that you don't get too involved. Certainly the boom operators, who's Hugh Sherlock and Tom Fennell, had a lot of coordination in terms of, because their job was incredibly difficult with a constantly moving camera. So in terms of, I was much more tech, assisting the kind of tech side of it on that, but they were every single day in the trenches with the operators. And there were shots where they got the shot, and then the whole crew, including me and everybody, because you felt invested, would cheer. So there was definitely like an investment in the story, even from a technical point of view. And the other interesting thing was, because we were doing like 8-minute, to 12-minute takes, you got a sense, because obviously I'm listening to it and sometimes watching it, and sometimes I've boomed a couple, but you got a sense of the story. So you were invested in the story, because it wasn't like you shot the wide and then you don't know how it's going to cut. Like, what you're making, that bit is the bit that's going to get used. So it definitely invested me in a way that other ways of filmmaking didn't. The biggest collaboration for the sound department, I think, is costume as well on a job like that, because a lot of the job was heavily radio mic dependent. And so Tom Fennell was the lead on that, and that's such a key collaboration as to how to record certainly a film where the camera is moving all the time.
Yeah, and a lot of digitally, painting out mics and things as well. I assume, like on Les Mis, where they were, well, yeah, recording vocals live and had to paint those out too.
I don't know if they painted out any. I don't think they painted out any mics. There was some painting out of radio mic like receiver antennas, but we we got there sort of on the first day and set them all up, thinking that they would be able to paint out more than they did, and it was decided that we should hide them more. And suddenly thought, oh, our next 3 months is going to be very difficult. But then we got into a really good routine of kind of working with the art department to hide our receivers and things around the set. So there was a lot of collaboration from all departments on my end on that one. Yeah, certainly. Really, the only people yeah. So basically, it was just very collaborative film in a way that not all of them are, because in its nature it had to be, otherwise it wouldn't have been achieved.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to, so before that, you of course worked on 5 entries of the recent Star Wars franchise as well. What's the, sorry, just happened on my screen. What was the process of working on those? Of course, they're huge studio, like, well, productions with, I guess, a big corporate hand behind them as well. How does that differ from other things? Because obviously it sounds like 1917 is more, yeah, was there a lot more control essentially with like Star Wars and how that production is done as opposed to like 1917? Or does it, when you're on set, does it still feel like just another shoot?
Like, in terms of the corporate nature of it, that's not something I, as a sound assistant, have to deal with on a day-to-day basis when I was assisting. The thing that does differ is kind of the amount of producers and the amount of people you're giving, facilitating. And then I guess on jobs like that, you can't really say no to anything. You have to be able to try and facilitate it to, even as the assistant, if the mixer adds something, you have to be able to try and facilitate it to the best of your ability. And the sort of difference is that those films, the Star Wars, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so it was a proper dream for me, like sitting in the cockpit and putting the helmet on and stuff. Yeah, it was wicked. But so those were films I did with my boss when I was working for him, called Stuart, and he basically took me onto those films as a member of the team. So I'm employed directly by the sound mixer. Or I was on those films. So it's a very similar thing in that my kind of mindset didn't change. It's just the scenario is different.
Yeah.
Well, the best bit about Star Wars for me was doing the creature. So all the creatures had comms, and over the course, so I sort of learned over those few films. I started off less experienced, and I think over the course of those movies was when I started to kind of feel comfortable in my knowledge and kind of who I was, and start taking things on myself. And trying to take on challenges myself rather than just respond to cues of what other people are asking me to do. So that would be the only thing I'd say about a 5-film series like that, is it allows room for growth. And like a good story to bring it back onto kind of, I realise we're not really talking about kind of the students here and their path, which and what they might take, but we did Han Solo, which we ended up shooting for 9 months on, which is an incredibly long shoot. And we had a trainee on that film that I was able to, and the team were able to put 9 months of effort into to train him to the best of our ability. And he came out of that and is now flying. So it does, shoots like that they afford the time to develop, if that makes sense. Because you sort of have to feel confident being in that role, but you can always get better.
Definitely. And you mentioned there as well about obviously the student journey to working on things. What do you see are the most, I guess, common routes, I guess, taking your experience as well and the people you work with as well? What are the best ways for people working in production sound specifically of getting on those productions to have that kind of training that you mentioned?
So certainly the start, I would say it's all like, so basically from the very, very start, nobody's going to hand it to you. Like, you have to scratch around yourself. And the first year or 2 years or 3 years is going to be bitty, and bits here, bits there, trying to get what you can out of it. And like, you have your Excel spreadsheet, and I would recommend anyone who wants to get into it, create it. It's a bit dry, but create an Excel spreadsheet of everyone you've talked to, when you've talked to them, what they're going to be on, that's, and just tick off and be methodical and be very gently, positively relentless in your pursuit of what you're doing, whilst keeping it really light, but believe in yourself and that you can get there. So that's the first bit, is trying to get your name, essentially trying to get your name out there and get known, because that's what you work on, is sort of your name recognition. And then the jump into sort of American feature world was through the skill set trainee scheme, and I don't think I'd be probably working without it. So that's an incredibly privileged thing, where the government pays an amount of I'm sure people probably know this, but pays an amount of the money for the production to bring on the trainee. So everybody benefits, and the trainee gets trained by the top teams on the bigger projects. Because smaller projects are great, but often there's not time to train, and you're on a small film, you might not have the person power to actually get someone trained properly. And certainly that's what I found when I did small films and small projects to start with. You were so busy trying to get it done that you just got it done however way you could, and there wasn't time to sit down and go, right, why does this work, why doesn't that work? So that would be, there are other ways of doing it as well, but for me that would be my aim point. And that's not to say that if someone didn't get on that, they couldn't do it. There are lots of ways to do it, and we'll maybe go through. I sent that little resource sheet, and we'll go through that at the end, maybe, as to the potential ways you can get in. But it's really just about getting your name out there, and like the key thing is, like, all the craft can be taught. Like I came out of university thinking I sort of knew it, and I didn't, because I don't think you do know at that point exactly what's going on. But what is really important is finding your team and finding the people that support you and will want to invest in you. There's a few questions, I don't know.
Yeah, this is an interesting one that I was thinking of earlier, actually, as well, when you're saying about Star Wars. Is it common for the post team to say you did well or didn't do well? Is it more of a scenario of, unless you hear from them, you assume everything you did was good?
Bang on. Yeah, 100%. Certainly, look, when I was assisting on those jobs, I'm not having those discussions with post. The mixer's having that job, and now that I'm mixing, I am having a little bit more conversation with post, but you tend to only hear when something's wrong. I certainly had a few times when the mixer would get a one-line email saying thanks for your work, it was good, and so that one-line email sums up kind of 4 months incredibly hard graft. But that's fine. But yeah, it's an interesting one, the communication between post. I had a really nice experience doing a film called Pirates, which isn't in post yet, but the post sound mixer went to the production meeting and we had talks, and so that I kind of knew what he wanted, so I was able to kind of gear my recording towards that. And then I did a really interesting one just before Christmas called Eternal Daughter, and the editor and the director are very sound conscious, the most I've ever worked with. They absolutely love it. So I did about 150 recordings of various things they wanted for the scenes around the sort of work that we were doing. But that conversation was with the editor, which was really nice. But she's very knowledgeable about what she wants to put the scenes together. So I have, interestingly, in coming into my kind of indie world that I'm in now, there is a bit more crossover. But certainly, to bring it to the question, no news is good news, always.
How early in the process of the film are you brought in for discussions? And I suppose an extra caveat to that is differentiation between before you were mixing and now. Obviously, I know with Carmen Horses, obviously you know Nick quite well, so I'd assume you kind of were there almost from the earliest point you could have been.
Yeah, it's an issue. So starting with my trainee work, you would get a call on the Friday saying, come in on Monday, and you come in on Monday, wait, good. And then you try and learn all the kit in a day, and you'd have to learn it as you were doing it. So it can be that's the kind of the latest point that you'll get called. And that's really tricky, but everybody has it where you kind of come in cold and you just have to try and pick it up as you're going along. When I got my team and was assisting for my regular team, we sort of knew, I would get asked on the end of the last project to go on to the next project, so we knew what was coming up. And then with that team, we would give a little bit to do some prep. So as assistants, you probably would do a week or 2 weeks prep work, but I would know ahead of time what I was doing with that, and that's the really lucky thing about working with the same people, because you never. Our thing was we never assumed that you're going to get asked, because you might not be. And there are times where I wasn't the right person to do a particular thing or not. But you kind of, if you did get asked to do the next one, you sort of knew what you were going to be doing. So that was a week or two prep, and then mixing can be anything from 6 months to. So, Calm with Horses was interesting in that Nick spoke to me about doing it, but then in Ireland they thought it was going to have to be a local sound mixer, which is absolutely fair enough. But then for whatever reason, I got a call kind of on Thursday saying, "Can you fly out Monday?" And to do the recce's, to which I said, "Yes, of course." And I couldn't. I'd booked in other work, and so then had to phone around that other work and go, "Oh, I'm really sorry. Like, my friend of 10 years has asked me to do his first film, and I've got to do it." So yeah, it's an interest. So it can be like that, but also then the next project called After Love, the director had spoke to Nick and got on with me, and we sat down 6 months ahead of time and talked about it. But that's again uncommon. you would normally get brought in about a month or 2 months ahead of a project as a mixer, because you've got recce's, you've got prep, so that's kind of common. So a lot of the others, that's kind of what's happened, but certainly 6 months is the longest, and like 2 days is the shortest.
What are those kind of conversations then as a mixer that you're having with, you know, the director about what they want from sound? How you said before that there was ones that were really particular about and really passionate about sound. How, I suppose, yeah, what are kind of those creative conversations that they're saying, we want the sound to be like this as opposed to this?
Well, almost every conversation starts with, I don't want to do any ADR, which is great. But then following up from that, it's like, I don't want to do any ADR, then the implications of that are this, 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 this. So that's good. I also, it's as much a personality thing as well as it is creative, because you're not making creative decisions it's creative problem solving, production sound, but you're not making kind of the deep creative decisions that you are with cinematography or, you know, costume design. But there is definitely creative problem solving to be done, and the director often at some point in the shoot will have to make a choice between this visual creative thing or your original like preserving the original performance. And so it's finding out where they are on that kind of scale, how willing they are not to have a fan to preserve the performance, or whether the cape blowing is the most important thing to them in the world, which it by all means can be. So that's a lot of the discussions with directors that I have. And I think often they are trying to suss out me and my personality and kind of what the energy that I'll bring to a set, which I try and bring as positive as possible, whilst keeping, you know, the standards of what I do high. So that's kind of how I pitch myself to directors, and I always try and read the script as much as possible and come with some very there's always questions that are brought up from reading the script, so I always try and bring them questions. Yeah, and then getting into prep, a lot of the collaboration is with the other. Costumes, a big one, so trying to get in early, find out what the costumes are, you know, because if you've got in modern filmmaking, radio mics are so key to making scenes work, because dynamic, you know, cameras they can do such dynamic things with a camera now that sometimes it's not possible to boom everything in a kind of traditional way. So you have to make the radio mics work to make a scene work. And then, yeah.
Is that something that's changed more since you first entered the industry, or since you were learning as a student?
I think it was changing as I started. Maybe a little bit earlier, but certainly like when I started, there were still people with 4 radio mics and that's all they'd use. And now, you know, your average, you know, I do independent projects in second units and I'm running 12, you know, up to, I can, you know, run 12. So it's also a methodology. Yeah, it's a methodology of working I've picked up from the people that I work with. I guess not everybody may agree with that. And there's no doubt that the boom is the best way to record. And it's the most natural sound, and it's the best, and you push for it wherever you can. But there are certain scenes or certain situations where you are forced off. The only way to do it is with the radio mics, and that's why you basically the sort of my philosophy is you get the radio mics working, you've got the scene, and then you build it from there. And then, you know, and it's all about preserving the original performance. That's all. All I'm interested in is like live performances and the actor's real performance on the day. That's they're never going to be able to. I mean, some people feel they can, but to recreate that moment in a studio in Soho with a coffee in their hand, or now in their living room over a mobile phone, it's just not going to have the, you know, it's so difficult. So for me, the kind of joy is, the best bit about mixing of my job is when you are recording something you know isn't going to happen again, and you know you're getting it, and you know there's just that little magic moment that you definitely know is going to be in the film and is maybe going to make it, you know.
Mm.
Someone's like, I sort of, I find myself sometimes transported, and then they finish it and I'm working on this isn't, you know, just like, you know, it's the suspense of disbelief watching a film, you know, that when it's really special on the day, that's how I get sucked in.
What is one of those moments that comes to mind for you? Were you there when Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill were doing their only scene together in the?
I was. Yeah, there was some.
Because that comes to mind as well, but I imagine that was surreal as a fan as well, and obviously retrospectively as well.
I mean, there were lots of surreal moments as a fan on that in really good ways. I on those films wasn't operating the boom on that one, so that was one of the ones where I was kind of assisting as a so you'd have a mix of two booms and then me as the assistant. So I wasn't directly up the front for that one to have that experience. But yeah, I mean, there were so many. Yeah, so there was a bit on Seven where they did a bit of a kind of fight between Luke and Vader, which I don't know made it in, I should be saying, but anyway, there was this bit and the whole stage filled with gradually everybody coming in, and then you realise there was about 50 people there who definitely don't need to be there and are just there just there to watch that moment. It was the sort of the first time a lightsaber was ignited. Yeah, so that was lovely. But certainly from my sort of recording perspective, there's a bit in Calm of Horses where the Cosmo Jarvis's character sits by a fire and has a kind of final telephone call. And that, I remember at that moment just being chucked out of it, which was lovely. So that's one moment that comes to mind for that from the mixing.
Yeah. And someone has asked, actually, I guess carrying on from that, what's your favourite part about being on set for recording? So it is that getting to experience that live performance.
Now it's that. When you're boom operating, so I sort of jumped, because I was doing a lot of technical work on these bigger movies, I jumped to mixing rather than booming as much. I've done a bit of booming, I've done enough to know, you know, what the deal is, but I never was very good, and certainly had some times where it definitely went wrong, which is one of the worst times. So that's the worst time on set, is when you're boom operating and it goes wrong. That's terrible. But when you're boom operating and it's going right and you hit, you know, walk and talk with 4 people and you're going around and then you're walking back and then you get that is an incredible thrill. So when I'm sort of assisting or booming, that's some of the favorite moments I've had. The other thing, I can talk about this from episode 9, is we were doing a big the dance scene in the desert, which isn't in the film as long as kind of we shot it, but it was this is the big comms number. And I pressed play on this iPad, which was linked by one little cable, and then it was coming out of 14 speakers into the Jordanian desert, and there was 500 Jordanian army dancing along to this track that we were doing with various people doing comms things in a different night. We had the cart rigged up on the back of a pickup. I just kind of stood with my foot on the back of a pickup, kind of shaking my head. I cannot believe this is happening.
So surreal.
So there are those moments, and they're certainly not constant. They're the moments to be treasured and enjoyed, and you sort of remind yourself of, you know, why it is you do it. And that was good.
And now as a mixer, what draws you to a project? Script, director, the genre of the film, or people recommending it to you?
The pithy answer is, you know, someone will pay me to do.
Yeah.
I do get some offers that I don't do, and this is the script, all on the script. If I like the script, I'll genuinely do everything I can to move heaven and earth to try and get the best I can for a project. It's an interesting. I seem to get brought in by the director often. Don't know why that is. Maybe because that's how it started. But so I tend to gravitate towards kind of directors that would like me. But if the story's good, yeah, absolutely, that's what I'll do. And then a lot of my work as well, which we haven't really spoken about, is kind of second unit work. Now doing kind of splinter units and second units for other much more established sound mixers, and that happens through a lot of kind of people I've met throughout my career as an assistant, who sort of throw me a day here or there because they sort of hopefully know I'm not terrible and not going to mess it up. But that's then a personality thing of who I've got on with personality wise. And I tend to work with the people that seem to get on with me as a person. Coming back to the point of that's the key, most important thing.
And again, there you brought up about the second unit and splinter unit. So, what is that? What is that for the production, and then what does that mean for sound as well?
So, a second unit is to do a major motion picture in the shortest amount of time, because the studios are so expensive. They often take a lot of it's often a lot of action work, but also it's a lot of kind of less kind of up the front acting work, and that goes to another unit. And sometimes the one director will be running between. It's very dependent on the director as to how much they are willing to relinquish or trust other people or who they've worked with. Because some of them, there are directors that have kind of action directors that they trust and enjoy working with, or there are some that have the power to say, I want to do it all, and they'll sort of run between two units. But it's essentially the stunt work, and then the sort of splinter stuff is often if they've dropped bits and pieces here and there that don't require the main actor, or isn't as chunky as the main unit are doing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for sound, nothing's different actually. It's exactly the same as recording a big 8-handed dialogue scene on main unit. It's exactly the same thought process. The only difference is you're trying to a lot of second units is you'll do the stunt work, and then you'll flick into having to do dialogue, and you've really got to like kick into gear to get that to the best of your ability. And then the only other thing that sometimes there's a lot of kind of communication work where you're facilitating communication between director on the we call them the voice of God mics, and you've sometimes got stuntmen up on wires with earpieces, and there's that sort of thing comes into it a little bit as well.
A bit more logistically challenging as well.
But then when you're doing your dialogue stuff, there's absolutely no difference in the quality that what you're trying to achieve on second unit to the main unit. You want to, like, I try and think, if I was the main unit mixer, what would I want here? And I try and do it to the best of my ability to give them what they would want.
Yeah. And obviously in the position that you're in now, of potentially, I guess, recruiting people to work on your team as well, what do you look for in like potential colleagues and employees, and what can students do now as they, I guess, look to graduate? Like, should they have a sound reel or a website or a social presence to kind of document everything, or is it more just the resume? What is it for you? Do you look for?
Is a list of credits. So that's essentially what I trade on, and it's like, I think a website doesn't hurt, but I also wouldn't go overboard. Your main currency is your interpersonal relationships that you are building and have built, and so it's cheesy, but kind of, if you network, it gives you the best possible opportunity. I look for people I'm going to get on well with, people that are going to be interested and excited about turning up to work, I look for people interested in sound, because that's not even some professional sound trainees working don't have the deepest interest in it. And you can normally spot quite quickly when someone does or not. So it doesn't have to be like life or like knowing every single, like, you don't need to know everything. You just have to be interested in it, which is important. And also interests outside of it as well. So a trainee that I brought on to a film a couple of years ago, who's now doing really well for herself, and I genuinely can't employ her again because she's on bigger and better projects, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm absolutely made up for her because she did their first couple with me. I just sat down to interview, and I just got a good sense of who she was as a person, and she's making a sort of self-making a documentary about a story in Japan, and just trying to get that made. And I really appreciated like that kind of initiative and interest in something, and kind of felt like, oh, that's how I feel about things. And so I think that just that connection is important as much as literally as much as anything else, because I genuinely, you can learn the craft. Like the most key thing is to be personable and pleasant and interested.
Definitely. And as well, on the note of networking, have you done much networking, and what kind of events or opportunities to network would you recommend for people to look out for to try and make those connections?
So I've sent this is for everyone. I sent Lewis a resources sheet with a few things on it that I hope he'll send out to those sound people that are sort of interested in location sound. But there's the Association of Motion Picture Sound and the Institute of Professional Sound, which are kind of organized associations which do kind of organized networking, and the Association of Motion Picture Sound does an organized mentor scheme as well. And then the other thing is there's social media, like there's some Facebook groups, which it's really good to just get on there, and you don't need to sort of post too much or kind of try and make too much noise. Just be aware of like what everyone's doing, and who you'll learn from that kind of who's who. And certainly there's a website, the AMPS website has a directory of every working or most working mixers in the UK who are a member of that. So that's a huge resource, and you can email them from it. So that's, a really fortunate resource that I used a lot. And you know, not everyone will respond, but one person might, and it's just that one person leads to the next person, leads to the next person. At like, so I sort of got two things with that. Is that I really think it's important to try and sort of find a mentor and someone to just speak to you openly and honestly about what it is to work in the film industry. And that can be done through organized things like amps, but it can also be quite organic. And sometimes you'll just be asking someone questions about something, and then like I've found it in my life that if I'm like interested and I ask people things, and then I've like worked around them on. It's never really your boss. It's sort of kind of the people around you, and then you sort of find out 6 months later, you're like, oh, hang on, I think they're invested in me and my journey. So no one will ever, no one will ever. If you say, will you be my mentor? They won't. But people will naturally find themselves drawn to wanting to help you succeed if you click with them, and then will find themselves accidentally mentoring you, and then it'll be 6 months to a year later, you know. So that, I think that's an important thing, is just try and find someone to speak openly and honestly about what it is to work. And I had an amazing chap called Ian Sands, who, this was through the official scheme, and I had some jobs that didn't go so well, which that's another thing to note, is that things will go wrong and jobs won't go as well, and you won't gel with people, and it's just the rough and tumble of freelance life, and it's really hard, and it doesn't get any easier, and I still struggle with it now, but then you find these people and then you speak to them, and he sort of just led me through what things that have happened to him, or, you know, just made everything sort of seem okay. So I think that finding that support is important. And then one of the most important networking things you've got is like your peers. Like, you know, I was really lucky in that when I graduated, there was about 5 or 6 of us, and we all wanted to do the same thing at the same time. And we were all able to share work around, and I sort of made a conscious effort that if I couldn't do something, I desperately tried to give it to someone in my, sort of keep it in the family. And then that comes back around, you know, when they do the same to you. So I think that is just as important as kind of networking with people already established, is to make sure you've got your team and people are on your team.
Definitely. Yeah, that's really nice advice. Tom Allen has asked, are there any films which have specifically inspired you to get into film? And what's your usual working relationships like with producers?
Star Wars was the initial, that's as a child what I loved. Yeah, science fiction was what made me want to get into filmmaking, and sound, I guess, because, you know, I watched the sort of documentaries with all the Ben Burt hitting the electrical things to make the sound of the lasers and all that kind of thing. And the other thing that is super corny, but it's the those massive behind the scenes things on Lord of the Rings. I'm not like a huge,
like 2 days worth.
Yeah, I like that more than I like the movies. So I think.
Oh, sorry, I'm still here. I just have to swap my battery out. Carry on.
Yeah, those are amazing. Stick any while I've become the host. So the power is all mine now. So stick any questions in the Q&A. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, the thing I'd say is, like, don't be afraid. What an important thing as well is, like, don't be afraid to get geeky with the kit, and like, I sort of came in before, and when we sort of looked at the kit, I felt people like take the kit out that you have at uni, like the opportunity that you have, take the kit out and like use it and get it wrong, and that's absolutely fine. I think that's a really good opportunity. Something that university affords you is the opportunity to just, you have access to kit, but you won't have, and you'll come out of uni and then it will be incredibly difficult to get that again. So if you are interested in location sound and interested in the kit, like use that to the best of your ability. And even if you don't do anything massive with it, just go and record things, and just try and do your own little stuff and work out how things work for yourself. Because I certainly find when someone tells me something, it doesn't go in until I get the thing in my hand, and then everything kind of clicks into place. So anyway, that would be a big thing that you can do now with the resources that you have. Do you notice, can the students get kit out at the minute?
Not at the moment, but once technicians are back on site,
okay.
They'll be able to start booking again through CISO.
I mean,
just as long as they're not used on like grads and already kind of pre-booked out, because we'll look to start shooting those, I believe, in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's loads of kit, so if it's available.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the best, the best stuff out. It all does the same, it all does the same stuff. That's another thing, is that I think I got too obsessed with like what is the best kit, but actually it's really how it's used. And as long as you have something that does the job you need to do it for, that's absolutely fine. So it's just working out what job you need to do, and then working out what is the kit you can have to do that job. It doesn't have to be the best at doing that. And another thing is, I've put, just like, as a student, I was quite geeky, and I would read, I would read the websites of people that sold sound kit, like sound kit dealers, to try and find out what the current kit is, to know what I needed to know. And I whilst you don't have to do it so massively, I think it's a useful thing. In the same way that it's useful to know who is around, it's useful to know what is being used
around
and how. But that is not to say, I do reiterate my point, is like, you don't have to know, everything can be taught. So you don't have to know things, but obviously it's, if you come with craft knowledge, it's incredibly useful, and it is helpful. Yeah. So one thing, this isn't necessarily relevant, but going back, like, I really like working with people who have done stuff that isn't film. So having done OBs and kind of built galleries and stuff, I really like people who have done that as well, because if you can build a gallery in a day and mic up 30 people on an OB, you can probably do the film sound stuff just fine. The only thing you then need to learn is the politics of the set, which has obviously got its own rhythms and is a bit different. And that's the one thing you won't know coming out of university into the work environment, and nothing can prepare you for that. And apart from just working and trying to observe how everything works, and it also changes from film to film, and I get it wrong all the time, and I don't know it. Nobody knows it, because it is different every time. But you try and negotiate to the best of your ability.
Definitely. So you were saying before about radio mics. Would you kind of recommend, as that's so commonplace in the industry now, to really try and hone those skills and get as much practice with that while the equipment's there for students?
100%. That's yeah, that's so key. And going also, it's, do you know what, it's as much as your radio miking technique, it's working with people when you're putting the radio mic on them, especially now, and especially for the next few years. It's how to make sure actors are comfortable, and working with the costume department as to dressing them. So they have to sound good, that's the key, but like the real skill of getting on the next job is working well with people. And if you can, especially in the grad films, like, work with your costume departments and make sure your actors are all are all comfortable and happy. And you could even do, I know that like if you haven't been mic'd before, put a really horrible costume on or like a jacket, or and get mic'd, and you'll feel it can be quite, when people do it wrong, it can be quite an invasive process. And so it's all about making people feel comfortable. And actually a little kind of boast of that is that someone the other day complimented me on exactly that, making sure that the actor was comfortable and happy, and they were like, I really appreciate that you did that. And so I kind of, that reinforced to me, like, great, that's my,
doesn't go unnoticed. And it is.
And then the other element to it is how it sounds, which requires a knowledge. Like one of the best people I've worked with, who's good at radio miking, makes his own clothes, so has a real knowledge of fabric and stitching and hemlines, and these, real knowledge of how clothes are put together, which helps him in negotiating where to put the mic, what to do with tapes to, make sure everything's stuck down. And it is a bit of a dark art, but that is also really important. And slightly an element of that, if you don't have that pre-existing knowledge, which I don't, is just doing it and finding out what works, and finding out what hasn't worked in the past, and also not being stuck in one way of doing it, like constantly trying to evolve how you make radio mic sound good. And if you can get that skill, you will not stop working. If you can make radio mic sound good and keep people happy, you could work for you definitely will be employable. And you won't do that immediately. You'll be making teas immediately, and you'll be putting carpet down and putting soft foam on people's shoes to keep them quiet. But something will happen and everyone else will be off, and you're the only person that will be able to put the radio mic on for actor at that specific moment. And if then it sounds good, you will gain you that little bit of trust. And then the next time that happens, you'll be asked straight away, oh, can you do that? And it will be quite quick before you're doing them all the time. Because so that's the same with, you extrapolate that to like everything really, but that is a particular skill that is an incredibly employable skill.
And another element of that I think can be quite useful for people to know, actually, for when leaving, is about how you get paid for work. So you said before as well, when you're working under I can't remember the guy's name that you mentioned, but the mixer on Star Wars, that he was your employer, but you're set up as presumably a sole trader, self-employed.
No, the PAYE actually. So sorry. So he's not directly. So he recommends his team to the production, who will employ you. I think as an assistant, as a trainee, and as a boom op, you're PAYE, employed directly by the limited company set up for each individual production.
Yeah.
There are certain things you can do, like make a limited company, but I wouldn't advise looking into that until 5-10 years down the line. I think you'll come out and you'll be mainly short contract pay as you earn, which in some ways, like, I'm terrible at the business side of it. I'm really awful, and I've had to work hard over the past couple of years to actually get better, because the week of pain trying to do this, it wasn't worth it. So don't worry too much about the business side of it, I would say, to start with. It's just you will get recommended by, as a trainee, you'll get picked and recommended by the sound mixer.
That's good to know. We've got a couple more questions. Someone asked, do you think GarageBand is sufficient for sound mixing?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it depends on what kind of project you're doing. run the right mics into it. And the only thing with a DAW like that is that the sort of portability of it's quite difficult, which is why things like little sound devices boxes and tune boxes and Arton boxes, that, you know, it tends to come in a box which you can stick in a bag, which is really portable. The only thing you'll come up against is the actual portability of it. But there's certainly there's some people who work recording primarily on computers, like Boom Recorder is one sort of thing. So yeah, absolutely, and especially if you're doing, you know, short films or something, it as long as it's set up right, absolutely, yeah, 100%, no reason why not. The only thing you'll come up against in GarageBand, I guess, is that you won't be able to use time code. But you know, if you use a clapperboard, it's a thing that records. So if the rest of your fundamentals are correct, then you will be able to use it. But you will find it easier if you use some of the kit from university that is more specifically suited to location recording, if that makes sense.
And David asks, have you had any experience with Vector?
I haven't personally, no. I think they are, no, I've never needed to talk to them about anything really, but it is good to know that they are there and they do have a lot of facility. I would say the union, in the way that it's working at the moment, is their primary strength is if you need to do any kind of employment tribunal, you know, if you're having to get into anything like that, which hopefully you won't, and I never have, they're incredibly useful and I think spring into action very quickly, which is good to know that they're there, and it's good to know that safety net's there. But in terms of getting work, we're not union based in the way that we get work. So you don't have to be a part of the union to work on any job in the UK. That's not a necessity.
And Anonymous asks, what's your favourite place you've travelled to work on a project? Was it Jordan or?
Jordan, the work that we did in Jordan was great. No, you know, it's amazing. Yeah, we went to the Wadi Rum. I have been very lucky in that I have travelled a bit with work. It's not, obviously not now, and probably not for a while, but I hear there are productions starting again which are going to travel in the summer. That's the talk. So it might be back on, which is exciting. The west coast of Ireland is one of my favourite places I've ever been. Yeah, that was incredible. That was on episode 8. Yeah, they built a set like 700 foot up the top of a cliff. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I absolutely loved a place called Trapani in Sicily on a film called Mary Magdalene, which is not, we're now out of kind of big film world, and there was about 40 of us on that crew, and it was just a very lovely experience where all the crew got on, everyone would be able to, all departments would go for drinks together, and Trapani is a beautiful place, and it just sort of had one road, and if of an evening, a balmy summer's evening, you'd wander up the road and then you'd sort of see the people over there, or you know, you'd just walk and everybody would just kind of, and then by the end of the evening everyone's kind of congregating together. Yeah, and also it had fantastic ice cream, so that's
always good.
Yeah, so there are some that are my favorite because of work, and there are some that are my favorite because of the kind of camaraderie and things outside of work. We did a huge explosion in Morocco for a film, which work was hard, really hard. But that moment which was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, was kind of made it all worthwhile. So yeah, so bit of a sort of mix of both things, but it's tough traveling for work. It's hard. And you're away from your partner, away from your family for some people, and that aspect of it is tough, especially if you're on a job where you go away on a few places, one after the other, or you're away for kind of 10 weeks at a time. But sometimes there are these moments within it that make it worthwhile.
And contrasting with that, as you said, there's no travel at the moment. What is work like at the moment? What are the, I guess, adaptations that you've had to make in what you do for COVID?
The sort of industry as a whole got incredibly quickly. They sorted themselves out, and I can't, the way that production teams and productions and the new COVID departments work with this stuff is kind of amazing that they basically very quickly worked out what the protocols would be to keep everyone safe, and then slam them into gear to allow us to be working during the film industries and television industries are carrying on during the lockdown, which is incredibly fortunate, really. So that it's a lot of testing and masks and 2 meters, and then a lot of sanitizing of anything you give out sanitized, anything you come back in is sanitized. So there are processes to go through, but it has slightly just become part of the work now. And it's not as sort of the first one we were on, where, when we came back, was really, everyone was really difficult and trying to work it out. But now it's just kind of part of the daily work. So the only thing is, it means that things are a little tighter, like certain people are only allowed in certain places. So that kind of freedom of, it's like I'm saying, the freedom of being able to go and do work experience on something isn't there at the minute. And certainly as the mixer, I sort of don't get onto set as much as possible, because I try, and the boom ops who are on the floor try and do as much of that as they can, if that makes sense. So there are certain kind of regulations, but the way they've set it all up is amazing, and it's very thankful for it, really, because we've been able to keep working. But and also, we've all completed Netflix, we've all watched everything on Prime, so they need to make more things. So people are desperate. As far as I can tell, production companies really want to shoot as much as they can.
Yeah,
people need
catching up. They've gone through all their content reserves.
So that's a real positive.
Absolutely.
So there are definite positives, as well as a kind of more regimented way of working.
Someone's asked an interesting question. How do you deal with co-workers who don't particularly like you and you don't get on with? Or usually, because you work with your closer team, presumably there's
my close
happen within your little bubble, I suppose.
I'm lucky but my close team I pick now, so I can pick people that I get on with, and also I found that I very quickly, as I said, sort of gravitated towards the people that got on with me. So I don't know how much it really massively comes up. There is always a bit of friction between departments sometimes when priorities go one way or another way. And I think the key thing for a sound person is to be a filmmaker. So think like a cinematographer, think like a gaffer. You've got to think almost always, if you're coming up against something, it's almost never personal. It's all to do with the work and what they require for the shot. So you have to approach things from not just I need to get the sound, because if you just think I need to get the sound, then you won't get on, because you have to understand why everybody's doing everything on a set to know where you can, what you can ask for, where you can push on things, you know, how to get it better in a way, how to record the best sound in a way that facilitates the production to the best of your ability, which includes kind of, you know, making sure that everybody else gets what they need. And I think that would be my advice is, although it's hard sometimes, just put yourself in their shoes, work out why they are acting how they are, and then what can you do to smooth that relationship.
And someone else, you mentioned earlier about on 1917, you know, working on the coming on and saying, we're not going to be able to paint that out. You need to find other ways, places to put these receivers and everything. And this question is, what's the standard process for setting up for a shoot? Do you work alongside the other departments on set ready, or do you have to wait until everyone else is done and then you go in and do your bit?
So now it's a bit more regimented in that sometimes you get your time to do, you know, this is sound's time to put down the carpets, this is the grip's time to put the track, you know, there's a bit more of that. But I try and work that nobody will wait on us ever. So you try and get in, you have to get in early, and you have to preempt stuff and be setting up, like, I try and you have to be thinking, so the kind of thing is the boom operators are thinking a scene ahead, and then the mixer's thinking a week ahead. That's the kind of level that you're trying to work ahead of time to preempt things that come up, so that you're ready to do stuff sort of before they happen. And there's definitely, like, you know, there's certain things, there'll be a protocol of, so say you're putting a radio mic on someone, there'll be a protocol of whether on certain productions the assistant will go to the unit base and do it at the unit base. Certain productions they'll bring everyone on, rehearse them, step them off, and then you'll do it. And it's all set by the first assistant director, who we haven't really mentioned, but they're so key in setting all of that kind of who does what when. And they'll all have a way that they like doing it. But certainly the way to not hold anyone up is to get in as early as possible and try and preempt as much as you can before it happens. And then sometimes you preempt it and you have to wait, and you can see it. You can see the slow car crash happening, and then, you know, because if you say something too early, you'll just get shooed away. You need to wait until it's just about to, and then you say your point, and then, oh yeah, okay, and then they'll do, you know. So yeah, being aware of as much as possible early helps with working with other people to make you as efficient and kind of low key as you can be.
Great. And David asked, this is our last question actually, do you think there is much work for graduates outside of looking for sound trainee work on set, but also in a post-production capacity? So
I sort of coming into this, my knowledge is obviously in location sound. I stopped doing post in second year, so I knew that's where I wanted to go. But I definitely think there is, like, the kind of traditional route is that you get in as a runner. I don't know how that's happening at the moment with post houses, but certainly, like on LinkedIn, actually, there's I see quite a lot of postings for kind of junior roles in post-production, smaller post-production houses, and the likelihood probably is that you'll go and work in a small post house, and then from that you'll get your rep around, and then someone in the big post house will will hear of you. And I sort of think it's a similar kind of thing. Yeah, so I guess the good thing for post production is that the jobs are advertised sometimes in a more traditional way than somebody looking like on in location sound, unless it's the trainee finder scheme or like a scheme. It's someone looking through their phone and going, you ring the first person, oh, they're not available. You ring the second person, they're not, you know. So that's how, and you'll sometimes put a text out to the people you know, oh, anyone know of a good trainee who and then you'll get a text back as a recommendation from someone. And that's how kind of jobs work in location sound. But post, there is an element of more posting online in a more professional sort of way. So I think your opportunities are easier to find in that way.
Yeah, definitely. And earlier you mentioned about the document that you sent across to me. I did send it out to some people. What I'll do is following this, I'll send it out to everyone that's currently here as well. And I'll make it available on demand. So if you are watching this on demand, I'll put a link to the document on OneDrive or something in the description of the video. Was there anything else on there that you think would be good to point out at the moment, just before we finish up? I know you touched on screen skills and a few of the other kind of like.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly sort of run through the top ones. Is the kind of screen skills and the UK Sound Association, which is AMPS, which I mentioned, which help. Those are the two things that really, from having no foothold in the industry or no knowledge, help me gain, just meet 5 people, which then meant I met 10 people, which then meant, you know, those two things. The slight advantage now is that there are I put some social media things up. The big one that I would be across is the Film and TV Sound UK Facebook group, which is a very friendly kind of Facebook group with quite a lot of people in it. But some of the people that post on there are, you know, the proper people, and it's run by some lovely people who genuinely care about like disseminating industry information to as wide as possible. So that's a big, I would say that's a really good one. There's a group for sound trainees there, which when you get your sort of first foot in the door trainee job, that's a good one to try and join. There's the thing about JW Sound is an American run thing, but a lot of kind of big American mixers post on that. So if you want to know how they're doing it in Hollywood, then that's a really good one to know. And like similarly, I put there's a sound card gallery. So when I was doing my grads, I went and looked at what people were doing with their sound cards and tried to copy it to the best of my ability. So that's quite useful. And then I've just put a few kind of the websites. I didn't put the kind of standard ones. I just put a few kind of interesting ones. The Ursa Straps YouTube channel is really good. That's run by Simon Bish, who's an ex-graduate, and he makes these Ursa Straps, which are kind of the industry standard way of radio mic belts. But he's also doing a lot of stuff where he's interviewing people or getting people to interview people and sort of giving out a lot of information about sound. It's really interesting. Under that, I've just put a little thing of, this is literally just off the top of my head, equipment to know. So just so you can get an overview of, this is what I thought, oh, these are the equipment that they'll need to know. So that might actually be quite useful. And then underneath that, the audio dealers websites that I used to look on and still do, to be fair, sometimes. And then a big one, which we haven't really touched on, which is quite technical, but understanding how radio mic frequencies work is a big plus. And I think if you're going to go into any sort of like documentary recording or anything, you definitely need to understand it. But also, if you're going to work as a production sound trainee, it's really helpful to understand why you're doing something. You know, if you're retuning something, why are you retuning it? What can you retune it to? That kind of business. And you know, the knowledge in that is incredibly deep. And I don't know half of it. I'd literally just scratch the surface to know what I need to know for my job, but it is an incredibly deep subject. So just have an overview of how it all works, basically.
That's really useful. Thanks again for joining us. It's been really insightful, and it's good, well, for me to know someone who's not trained in sound as well, to learn a lot more about it in depth and how to go about that. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, hopefully we can get you back at another point as well, maybe for a masterclass, with like a small group or something like that.
If you take anything away from it, anyone who does want to work in it, I hope that it's not this kind of like big scary thing but isn't knowable, and kind of I've made it sort of making it up as, or I've made it up as I've gone along, and that has got me to a point where I can call it my job, and that is literally it. There's no more to it than that, really. You just kind of flag it until the point where, oh, this is my job now, and that is, it's sort of no different to what you're doing now. It just continues on,
and you get paid for it, all being well.
Sometimes.
No, that's great. Yeah, loads of people in the chat saying thank you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. Cheers, David.
Thank you so much for having me, Liv. Really nice.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye.